Watch where the flesh was introduced earlier in chapter 7. Verse 6, but now we are delivered from the law, that being dead wherein we were held, that we should serve in newness of spirit and not the oldness of the letter. You see, it's not good enough to know we must serve God. But what method we use to serve God is the key to victory or failure. Paul distinguished serving God in newness of spirit from serving him in oldness of the letter. And what he described in describing his failures was serving God in oldness of the letter. Now, if this was something that couldn't help but be the situation until AD 70, why did Paul know the answer of walking after the Spirit? Was it impossible for people to walk after the Spirit before AD 70? No. Otherwise, he never would have rebuked the Galatians in Galatians 5 for not walking after the Spirit. We'll get to that later too. So, serving God in oldness of the letter is walking after the flesh. It's taking a list of do's and don'ts, walking away with nothing more than willpower to make yourself live right. What else do you do with a list of do's and don'ts? Regulations are provided for you in a list, either verbally or written, in order for you to make yourself obey them. People do that all the time with the New Testament, and they mistaken the purpose of the New Testament. You see, it's not that Paul had to serve in oldness of the letter before AD 70 as though he had no other option because AD 70 would allow them to walk after the Spirit, but that Paul could have walked after the Spirit and not lived such a failing life had he only known about it. Now, when he wrote this in Romans, he knew it then, but he was using rhetoric, putting himself in the perspective of his past failure, and talking as though it was going on just for the sake of helping us walk through it with him. He did come to know about this after he analyzed the situation. He even describes how he analyzed it when he was doing that. And so Paul related his experiences in Romans 7 that enabled him to learn why he failed, so as to be able to walk us through step by step in the details of what caused his failure and what had to stop occurring in his efforts to serve God. Paul came to realize in Romans 7, reiterating his past experience of going through it, speaking in the present tense only because he's speaking rhetorically, not as though this was an actual present tense situation. Just like me saying, put yourself in this situation. Okay, we go here, we go there, and then we have to go there. That's not it's a common manner of speaking is what I'm trying to say. Paul realized that if a force of sin was in his human flesh and hindered him from willing his flesh to do good, he had to somehow be delivered from that body. That's nothing to do with a covenantal body. Paul actually said that he had to escape the mortal flesh in which no good thing, that is sin, dwelt in him, so that he could be free from his failures. As shocking as it may sound, he claimed he actually was delivered. In verse 25, through Jesus Christ, though. See, this is it. Through Jesus Christ we're delivered. And that refers back to something earlier in Romans 7. Let's look at verse 4. Wherefore, my brethren, ye also are become dead to the law by the body of Christ, that you should be married to another, even to him who is raised from the dead, that we should bring forth fruit unto God. So the body of Christ here is speaking of his actual flesh and blood body that died on the cross. When he physically died, our union to him, since we were baptized into his death and came into union, allows us to also experience death to the law. You see, once we united with Jesus at his death, we're baptized into his death. We come into union with him right there. That's why we're called the body of Christ, for very literal reasons. His body death counts as our body death, although our bodies are still alive. We receive the same benefits that he received from physically dying, although we never physically died. And it's all because we're in union with him since our baptism into his death. And so he physically died to the law. Because we're united to him in the Spirit, we're dead to the law too, just as dead as he was. And it says, you're become dead to the law by the body of Christ, that you should be married to another, even to him who is raised from the dead, that we should bring forth fruit unto God. So bringing forth the fruit unto God is living a life that's pleasing to him, which throughout Romans 7, Paul describes a struggle to do. He wasn't bringing forth that fruit. Now, when Paul wrote this, he was bringing forth the fruit. But he took us back in his past, and he rhetorically spoke as though it was still happening to help us relate better, and a matter of speaking, follow what he's teaching more perfectly. We're made dead to the law, not by passing the year AD 70, but by the body of Christ. The reason it says we're delivered through Christ is because his death counted as our deaths. Paul was already dead to the law through Christ. But because he was not living by that faith and instead walking after the flesh or trying to make his flesh serve God by resorting to fleshly willpower, he failed. Paul was not saying anything about the need for AD 70 to occur, and obviously he didn't know the date of that coming and destruction was AD 70. But he wasn't saying that the coming of Christ has to occur so that we can stop failing. No. He was not living by faith, and he was walking by flesh, and that is why he was failing. He said that he had to call upon the strength of the indwelling Christ in order to successfully serve God. Serving through oldness of the letter is making self do good and avoid evil in order to serve God. Newness of the Spirit causes us to do good also, although the oldness of the letter failed, but the purpose is to do good. But it's relying on the Spirit of God instead of making ourselves try to do good. And it is through Christ, relying on his Spirit, that we succeed. We died to the law by the body of Christ. We actually experienced the same benefits Christ experienced when he physically died. We didn't die physically to achieve these benefits. Whatever Christ achieved, though, can be claimed as our achievements simply because we came into union with him from the point of our baptism into his death. From the point of that baptism, everything achieved by Jesus is considered to be our achievements also due to that union. This means we are positionally dead to the law and have no need to resort to it in order to serve God. But if we don't acknowledge that and learn that, there is a better way called newness of the Spirit in which to serve God. If we don't learn that, we will utilize self-effort and we will continue to fail whether we're in years before AD 70 or not. Another reason I know that walking after the Spirit was available before AD 70 is due to the parallel issues raised in Galatians 5, to which I referred earlier. Galatians 5 and 15. But if you bite and devour one another, take heed that you be not consumed one of another. This I say then, walk in the Spirit, and you shall not fulfill the lusts of the flesh. For the flesh lusteth against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh, and these are contrary the one to the other, so that you cannot do the things that you would. Now doesn't that sound exactly like what Romans 7 said? That which I would, I do not, and that which I would not, that I do. He said the same thing. Your flesh is lusting against the Spirit. In Romans 7, he says, in my members, there's a law that's warring against the law of my mind. The flesh against the Spirit. And he says, but if you be led of the Spirit, you are not under the law. Now, why would he tell them to walk after the Spirit, be led of the Spirit, so they wouldn't be under that law and wouldn't be under this coercion to use flesh to do good, and then, unfortunately, find out whenever they use that flesh, sin inside of that flesh kicks up and stops them from fulfilling the will of God, if it wasn't possible to walk after the Spirit in that day in which he wrote this. He wouldn't rebuke somebody for not walking after the Spirit if they weren't able to do it anyway until AD 70. Galatians was written before AD 70. Why does he tell them to walk after the Spirit? Well, aren't they supposed to be not delivered from the covenantal body, so it was impossible for them to walk after the Spirit till AD 70? No, the covenantal body is not the issue when it says the body of death, from which Paul prayed to be delivered. Paul didn't say they could not walk after the Spirit until after AD 70, or after Jesus Christ returned, as full preterism proposes. He simply said they could do it at that time, and it would cause them to cease devouring one another and fulfilling the lusts of the flesh. He told them to walk after the Spirit. He didn't say, it's unfortunate, guys, but you can't walk after the Spirit until after Christ comes in AD 70. No, he rebuked them for not walking after the Spirit, implying they should have been doing so.